you know the witch who could change her appearance at will, who fought on the front lines against the forces of darkness, and who proved that true love can flourish even in the darkest moments of wizarding history? Today we're going to dive deeply into the extraordinary life of Nymphadora Tonks, one of the most fascinating and courageous characters in the magical world. Get ready to discover secrets about her troubled childhood, her forbidden connection with one of the oldest pure-blood families in England, her impossible love that defied all conventions, and the ultimate sacrifice that changed all our destinies. This is a story of courage, identity, rebellion, and unconditional love that will move you from beginning to end. But before we begin this incredible journey, I need your support to continue bringing complete and detailed content like this. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe and activate the bell. It's quick, it's free, and makes all the difference for the channel to grow. And leave here in the comments which city you're watching this video from. I love knowing where you're from and feeling this connection with people from all over the world. Now yes, let's begin this extraordinary story. Nymphadora Tonks was born sometime between 1972 and 1973, daughter of Ted Tonks and Andromeda Tonks, formerly known as Andromeda Black. And right from her birth, we can see that her story would be marked by contradictions and breaking paradigms of the wizarding world. To fully understand who Tonks was, we first need to understand the complex origin of her family, especially the maternal side that carried an enormous weight of tradition, prejudice, and power. Andromeda Black was born into one of the oldest and most respected wizarding families in Great Britain, the noble and most ancient House of Black. This family had a motto that echoed through generations, stamped on their genealogical tapestry and engraved in the heart of each member: toujours pur, always pure. The Blacks were obsessed with blood purity. They fervently believed in the superiority of pure-blood wizards over Muggleborns, and even over those with mixed blood. They were known for their wealth, political influence, and connections with the dark arts. Many members of the Black family throughout the centuries supported ideologies that promoted segregation and even the elimination of Muggle-born wizards. Andromeda had two sisters, Bellatrix and Narcissa. The three Black sisters grew up together in the family mansion, educated in the traditional values of blood purity, high society wizarding etiquette, and sophisticated magic. Bellatrix, the eldest, completely embraced the family ideology and would eventually become one of the most fanatical and cruel followers of Lord Voldemort, one of the most feared Death Eaters. Narcissa, the youngest, would also follow the expected path, marrying Lucius Malfoy, another pure-blood wizard from a traditional family, and maintaining the traditions of blood purity. But Andromeda was different. Despite all the rigorous education and overwhelming expectations of her family, she fell in love with Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born wizard. Ted had no wizarding lineage. His parents were ordinary people without magical powers, and in the world of the Blacks, this made him less than nothing. For the Black family, a Muggle-born was an abomination, someone who stole magic from true wizards, someone unworthy of respect or consideration. The relationship between Andromeda and Ted was more than forbidden. It was unthinkable, a betrayal of the family's fundamental values. When Andromeda decided to marry Ted Tonks, she knew exactly what she was doing and what the consequences would be. The Black family did not tolerate deviations from their rigid rules. Any member who stained the family honor, who became involved with Muggleborns, or who showed sympathy for those they considered inferior, was completely disinherited and erased from family existence. And that's exactly what happened to Andromeda. She was literally burned off the Black family tapestry, a magical artifact that recorded all members of the lineage. Where once her name had been, her face embroidered in gold and silver threads, now there was only a scorched black hole, as if she had never existed. Andromeda lost everything when she chose love. She was cut off from her inheritance, repudiated by her parents, rejected by her sisters, excluded from the pure-blood society that had been her entire world. But she didn't regret it. She and Ted built a life together based on true love, mutual respect and values, completely different from those with which Andromeda had grown up. And it was in this home, built upon rebellion against prejudice and the choice of love over tradition, that Nymphadora Tonks was born. Tonks's own name already carried this interesting duality. Nymphadora was a name clearly inspired by mythology, elaborate and even pretentious, perhaps a last link to the sophisticated naming traditions of the Black family, who always chose names linked to stars, constellations, and mythological figures. But from a young age, Tonks hated this name. She thought it was horrible, too formal, inadequate for who she really was. And here we already begin to see a fundamental trait of her personality. Tonks didn't want to be defined by others' expectations or traditions that didn't make sense to her. She insisted that everyone call her only Tonks, and reacted with genuine irritation when someone used her full first name. Growing up as the daughter of Andromeda and Ted meant growing up in an environment very different from what most wizards from old families knew. Ted and Andromeda raised their daughter with values of equality, acceptance, and justice. Tonks learned from an early age that a person's blood origin didn't determine their worth, that Muggleborns were as capable and deserving of respect as pure-blood wizards, and that the prejudice that had destroyed her mother's family was something to be fought, not perpetuated. But Tonks inherited something very special, something extremely rare in the magical world. She was born as a Metamorphmagus, a witch with the innate ability to change her physical appearance at will, without needing potions, spells, or magic wands. This is an extremely rare magical ability, 1 in a million, that cannot be acquired or learned. You're simply born with it or not. And Tonks had this gift fully and naturally. From a very young age, probably still as a baby, Tonks already demonstrated this ability. She could change the color of her hair instantly, going from shocking pink to purple, from turquoise blue to vibrant orange. She could alter the shape of her nose, making it hooked like a duck's beak or turned up like a button. She could change the color of her eyes, the shape of her face, even her height and physical constitution to a certain extent. For Tonks, her appearance was fluid, mutable, a form of personal expression that changed according to her mood, personality, and will. This Metamorphmagus ability wasn't just a fun trick or a magical curiosity. It was a fundamental part of who Tonks was as a person. She never felt trapped by a fixed appearance, never defined herself by permanent physical characteristics. In a world where many people, especially in traditional wizarding society, were obsessed with lineage, appearance, and inherited characteristics, Tonks was the perfect antithesis of that. She was who she chose to be at each moment, and her appearance reflected her vibrant, irreverent, and completely authentic personality. When it was time to go to Hogwarts, the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Tonks was more than ready. She was selected for Hufflepuff House, known for valuing hard work, loyalty, and patience. And here it's worth highlighting something important. Hufflepuff is often underestimated, seen as the house of mediocre or less brilliant wizards. But this couldn't be further from the truth. Hufflepuff produced extraordinarily talented wizards, and Tonks was certainly among them. During her years at Hogwarts, Tonks stood out in various ways. She wasn't the most well-behaved student, certainly not someone who followed rules blindly or who worried excessively about appearances. She was known for her relaxed nature, her sense of humor, her fierce loyalty to friends, and her notorious clumsiness. Yes, despite all her impressive magical abilities, Tonks was extraordinarily clumsy. She constantly tripped, knocked over objects, bumped into furniture, and generally caused small disasters wherever she went. This combination of exceptional magical talent and physical lack of coordination was one of Tonks's most charming and humanizing characteristics. But academically, Tonks was brilliant. She had a natural talent for defense against the dark arts, a subject that would become central to her professional life. She was also exceptionally good at charms, transfiguration, and other practical disciplines. Her favorite teacher, as she herself would mention later, was Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, who clearly saw special potential in her. After graduating from Hogwarts, Tonks made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She decided to become an Auror, one of the most prestigious, dangerous, and difficult jobs in the wizarding world. Aurors are elite wizards trained by the Ministry of Magic to capture dark wizards, investigate serious magical crimes, and protect the wizarding community from the most dangerous threats. The training to become an Auror is notoriously rigorous, lasting 3 full years and requiring exceptional grades in several fundamental subjects. Tonks began her Auror training sometime after 1990, and spent 3 intense years developing advanced skills in magical combat, investigation, infiltration, tracking, and numerous other specialties. Auror training wasn't just academically challenging, it was physically and emotionally exhausting. Candidates were constantly tested, pushed to their limits, prepared to face the most dangerous and morally complex situations the wizarding world had to offer, and Tonks excelled. She qualified as an Auror around 1994, becoming one of the youngest witches to achieve this position in generations. Her Metamorphmagus ability was incredibly valuable for Auror work. She could infiltrate any situation, assume any identity, follow suspects without being recognized, escape dangerous situations by completely changing her appearance in seconds. She was an invaluable asset to the Auror department, but being an Auror in the mid-90s meant something very specific. The wizarding world was in a period of relative peace, but it was a fragile peace, built on the ashes of the last war against Voldemort. Voldemort had mysteriously disappeared in 1981 after trying to kill baby Harry Potter and having his spell reflected back against himself somehow. He was destroyed, or at least that's what everyone believed, and his followers, the Death Eaters, were captured, killed, or went into hiding. But for those who really understood what had happened, for those who knew the true nature of Voldemort and the extent of his dark magic, there was always an uncomfortable suspicion that he could return. And that's exactly what happened in June 1995, at the end of the Tri-Wizard tournament, when Voldemort returned in a horrible dark ritual, using Harry Potter's blood to recover his physical body. It was at this critical moment that Tonks was recruited for something much bigger than her regular work as an Auror. She was invited to join the Order of the Phoenix, a secret organization founded by Albus Dumbledore during the First War against Voldemort to fight the forces of darkness. The Order of the Phoenix had been dissolved after Voldemort's fall in 1981, but with his return, Dumbledore reconstituted it immediately. The Order of the Phoenix was composed of the bravest, most skilled and most trustworthy wizards and witches Dumbledore knew. They were people willing to risk everything, including their own lives, to protect the wizarding world from Voldemort's tyranny. And Tonks, despite her youth, was considered worthy of joining this elite group. She was only 22 or 23 years old when she became a member of the Order, but she had already proven her worth, her courage, and her ability. Tonks's first important mission with the Order of the Phoenix was to be part of the advance guard that escorted Harry Potter from the Dursley house on Privet Drive to the Order's headquarters at number 12 Grimmauld Place in August 1995. This was the first time Harry met Tonks, and the impression she made was immediate and striking. Tonks arrived at the Dursley house along with other members of the Order, including Mad-Eye Moody, Remus Lupin, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and others. Harry was immediately intrigued by that young witch, with shocking pink hair and vibrant personality that contrasted totally with the seriousness of the situation. Tonks was relaxed, friendly, funny, and her ability to change her appearance at will fascinated Harry. She showed him how she could alter her nose to a duck's beak or a pig's snout, how she could change the color of her hair instantly, and she did all this with a natural sense of humor and a complete lack of pretension. During the broomstick flight from Surrey to London, Tonks helped protect Harry, demonstrating her skills as an auror and her dedication to the Order's mission. When they finally arrived at Grimmauld Place, Harry began to better understand who Tonks was and what her role was in this war that was just beginning. Number 12. Grimmauld Place was the old house of the Black family, the same family from which Tonks's mother had been expelled decades earlier. The house now belonged to Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, who had inherited the property after his mother's death. Sirius was trapped in Grimmauld Place, unable to leave because he was still a fugitive wanted by the Ministry of Magic for crimes he hadn't committed. And for Tonks, being in that house was a complex and emotionally charged experience. Tonks had never visited her maternal family's house before. She had grown up hearing stories about the Blacks, knowing that her mother had been rejected and excluded, that her uncles, aunts and cousins on her mother's side didn't recognize her as part of the family. And now she was there, in the physical heart of that lineage that had rejected her before she was even born. It was disturbing and fascinating at the same time. Tonks's relationship with Sirius Black was particularly interesting. Sirius was her first cousin, son of Walburga and Orion Black, brother of Andromeda. But they had never met before because Sirius had been imprisoned in Azkaban when Tonks was just a small child, and during the 12 years he was imprisoned, there had been no family contact. When Sirius escaped from Azkaban in 1993 and then joined the Order of the Phoenix when it was reconstituted, he and Tonks finally met. And they got along very well. Despite the age difference and completely different life experiences, Sirius and Tonks shared something fundamental. Both had rejected the toxic values of the Black family. Both had chosen to stand on the right side of history. Both valued courage, loyalty, and justice above blood purity and tradition. Sirius was delighted with Tonks's irreverence, with her sense of humor, and her ability to bring lightness even in the darkest situations. For Sirius, who was trapped in that house full of painful memories of a family that had hated and disinherited him, having Tonks around was a relief, a connection to something lighter and more hopeful. Tonks visited Grimmauld Place regularly during that period, both for order missions and simply to keep Sirius company, who was increasingly depressed and frustrated with his confinement situation. She tried to cheer him up, making jokes, changing her appearance to ridiculous characters just to pull him out of that melancholy, bringing news from the outside world. But not even Tonks could really alleviate the weight of what Sirius was feeling. During this period, Tonks also developed a complex relationship with another important member of the Order of the Phoenix, Remus Lupin. Remus was a werewolf, a man marked by a curse that transformed him into a dangerous and uncontrolled creature during the full moon. He had been a close friend of Sirius Black, James Potter and Peter Pettigrew during their years at Hogwarts, forming a group known as the Marauders. He had also been Harry Potter's defense against the dark arts teacher during his 3rd year at Hogwarts. Remus Lupin was much older than Tonks, 13 years older to be precise. He was reserved, cautious, marked by years of discrimination and suffering for being a werewolf in a society that feared and hated his condition. He lived on the margins of wizarding society, hardly ever got work due to prejudice against werewolves, and carried an enormous weight of guilt, shame, and low self-esteem. Remus didn't consider himself worthy of happiness, of love, of a normal life. He had convinced himself that his werewolf condition made him dangerous, undesirable, and unsuitable for genuine relationships. But Tonks saw something completely different when she looked at Remus Lupin. She saw a brave, intelligent, kind, and deeply good man. She saw someone who had suffered terrible injustices and still remained loyal, honest, and dedicated to doing what was right. She saw someone who deserved love, respect, and happiness, regardless of his werewolf condition. And at some point during that period working together in the Order of the Phoenix, Tonks fell in love with Remus Lupin. We don't know exactly when or how it began, but we know that during 1995 and 96, while they worked together on dangerous missions for the Order, while they spent long nights at Grimmauld Place planning strategies and protecting Harry Potter, something changed between them. Tonks, with her open and honest nature, didn't hide her feelings. She was vibrant, cheerful, passionate about life, and completely devoid of prejudices. For her, the fact that Remus was a werewolf was completely irrelevant to her feelings for him. But Remus resisted. He emotionally withdrew, created barriers, insisted that a relationship between them was impossible and wrong. He had all the excuses. He was too old for her, he was too poor, he was too dangerous. He was a werewolf who could put her at risk, who could tarnish her reputation, who could pass his condition to potential children. Remus had internalized decades of discrimination and prejudice against werewolves, and this had destroyed his ability to believe he deserved to be loved. The dynamic between Tonks and Remus during this period was painful to watch for those around them. Tonks, usually so cheerful and full of life, began to wither emotionally. Her metamorphosis, which had always been so fluid and natural, began to fail. When a Metamorphmagus is under great emotional stress or severe depression, they can lose control over their ability, and that's exactly what happened to Tonks. Her hair, which she usually kept in vibrant and fun colors, became stuck in a lifeless brown. She couldn't change it anymore, no matter how much she tried. It was as if the color had drained not just from her hair, but from her entire life. Meanwhile, terrible events were unfolding in the broader wizarding world. In June 1996, the Battle of the Department of Mysteries occurred at the Ministry of Magic. Harry Potter and several of his friends from Hogwarts were lured into a trap in the Department of Mysteries, where they were attacked by Death Eaters led by none other than Bellatrix Lestrange, Tonks's aunt. The Order of the Phoenix, including Tonks, arrived to rescue the children, and a fierce battle erupted. Tonks fought bravely in that battle, facing experienced and dangerous Death Eaters. But the battle had a terrible cost. During the combat, Tonks was hit by a curse sent by none other than her own aunt, Bellatrix Lestrange. The curse left her seriously injured, and she fell unconscious while the battle continued around her. She was taken to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, where she spent weeks recovering. But the most devastating loss of that night wasn't her own injury. During the battle, Sirius Black, her cousin who had become so dear to her, was killed. Bellatrix Lestrange, in a moment of casual cruelty, hit Sirius with a curse that threw him backward through the veil in the death chamber, a mysterious arch from which there is no return. Sirius was dead, and Harry Potter, who had just found his godfather and was building a relationship with him, was devastated. Sirius's death also deeply affected Tonks. They had had so little time together, only a few months since they met, and now he was gone, and the person responsible for his death was her own aunt. Her mother's sister, who had chosen the darkest possible side, who had become one of Voldemort's most fanatical and cruel followers. It was one more brutal demonstration of the line that divided the Black family. One more reason why Tonks knew there were only two sides in this war, and there was no possible middle ground. The following year, 1997, was one of the darkest in recent wizarding history. Voldemort was rapidly gaining power. The Death Eaters were becoming increasingly bold, and the Ministry of Magic, under the incompetent leadership of Minister Rufus Scrimgeour, was struggling to maintain any control over the situation. The war was no longer a distant possibility. It was a present and terrible reality. In April 1997, the Battle of the Astronomy Tower occurred at Hogwarts. Death Eaters invaded the school, and in the chaos that followed, Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age and leader of the Order of the Phoenix, was killed. Dumbledore's death was a devastating blow to all who fought against Voldemort. He had been the only wizard Voldemort truly feared, the strategist behind the resistance, the symbol of hope and leadership. With his death, many began to lose hope that the war could be won. Tonks was present during the battle at Hogwarts, fighting alongside other members of the Order to protect the school and its students. She fought fiercely, but the battle was chaotic and brutal, and the outcome was devastating. Along with Dumbledore's death, several members of the Hogwarts community were injured, and the school, which had always been seen as the safest place in the wizarding world, had been violated. But it was after this battle, during Dumbledore's funeral held on the grounds of Hogwarts, that something fundamental changed in the relationship between Tonks and Remus Lupin. During the funeral, as the wizarding community gathered to honor the man who had meant so much to so many, Tonks and Remus finally confronted their feelings for each other openly and publicly. We don't know exactly what was said between them, but we know that Remus finally dropped his defenses and admitted his feelings for Tonks. He finally allowed himself to believe that he deserved love, that his werewolf condition didn't make him unworthy of happiness, that Tonks truly loved him, and that he had the right to reciprocate that love. It was a moment of tremendous vulnerability and courage for Remus to go against everything he had been conditioned to believe about himself for decades. For Tonks, seeing Remus finally lower his barriers and allow himself to be loved was transformative. Her metamorphosis returned instantly. Her hair returned to the vibrant colors she loved, going back to the shocking pink that was her trademark. Color, literally and metaphorically, returned to her life. She was radiant, happy, complete in a way she hadn't been for months. Tonks and Remus began an open and committed relationship after Dumbledore's funeral. But that didn't mean it would be easy. The world around them was crumbling faster and faster. Voldemort was consolidating his power. The Ministry was on the brink of collapse, and the Death Eaters were conducting increasingly bold attacks against Muggle-born wizards, members of the Order of the Phoenix, and anyone who opposed the dark regime being established. At some point during the summer of 1997, Tonks and Remus got married. It was a small, intimate ceremony, held in secret due to the dangerous circumstances. There was no time or safety for grand celebrations, but that didn't matter to them. What mattered was that they were together, that they had chosen to commit to each other despite all the uncertainties and dangers, that they were facing what was to come as united partners. The marriage of a Metamorphmagus to a werewolf was, in itself, an act of defiance against the prejudices of the wizarding world. Many in wizarding society saw werewolves as subhuman creatures, dangerous and untrustworthy. There were discriminatory laws that limited where werewolves could work, where they could live, with whom they could have relationships. And here was Tonks, a young, talented witch from a respectable family, despite the complications with the Blacks, openly and proudly marrying a werewolf. It was one more demonstration that Tonks didn't care about social conventions, prejudices, or expectations. She loved Remus for who he was, and that was all that mattered. But their happiness would be tested in ways no one could predict. Shortly after the wedding, Tonks discovered she was pregnant. She was ecstatic. She had always wanted to be a mother, had always imagined a family, and despite all the terrible circumstances around them, the idea of bringing a new life into the world, a child made from the love between her and Remus, filled her with joy and hope. But Remus's reaction was completely opposite. He panicked. All the fears and insecurities he had tried to overcome came back with full force. He was terrified by the idea that his child could inherit his lycanthropy, that the child could be born as a werewolf condemned to the same kind of life of suffering and discrimination he had faced. He was convinced he had made a terrible mistake in marrying Tonks, that he had been selfish in allowing himself to be happy, that now he was ruining not only Tonks's life, but also the life of an innocent child. Remus's reaction was so extreme that he considered abandoning Tonks and the baby. In a moment of desperation, he even appeared at the house where Harry Potter was hiding, trying to join Harry, Ron and Hermione on their mission to find and destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes, essentially trying to run away from his responsibilities as a husband and future father. Harry, demonstrating remarkable maturity and perception, confronted Remus harshly, telling him he was being cowardly, that he was abandoning his family at the moment they needed him most, that his father, James Potter, would never have done something like that. Harry's words hit Remus like a shock of reality. He realized he was repeating the same patterns of self-deprecation and fear that had governed his life for so long, but this time he was hurting the people he loved most in the process. He returned to Tonks, asked for forgiveness, and committed to being the husband and father she and the baby deserved. Tonks, demonstrating the emotional strength and generosity of spirit that had always characterized her, forgave Remus. She understood that his fears came from a deep place of trauma and discrimination, that they weren't really about her or the baby, but about all the horrible things the world had done to him for decades. And she chose to stand by him, support him, and build the family they both wanted, despite all the obstacles. During the pregnancy, Tonks continued working as an Auror as much as possible, although eventually she had to slow down as the baby grew. But even pregnant, she remained committed to the fight against Voldemort. The wizarding world was at its darkest moment. In August 1997, the Ministry of Magic had fallen under Voldemort's control. Minister of Magic Rufus Scrimgeour was assassinated, and Voldemort installed a puppet, Pius Thicknesse, as the new minister, while his Death Eaters took key positions in all government departments. One of the first actions of the ministry under Voldemort's control was to establish the Muggle-born Registration Commission, a fascist organization designed to persecute, arrest, and eventually eliminate all Muggle-born wizards. Muggle-born wizards and witches were forced to attend hearings where they were interrogated about how they obtained their magic, with the absurd premise that they had stolen magic from true wizards. It was a systematic and genocidal purge, and it was exactly the kind of ideology the Black family had supported for generations, taken to its logical and horrible extreme. Tonks, as the daughter of a Muggle-born wizard, had deep personal connections to this persecution. Her own father, Ted Tonks, was in mortal danger. Muggle-borns and their pure-blood or half-blood allies who refused to submit to the new regime were being actively hunted by snatchers, squads of Death Eaters who captured and killed those considered undesirable by the new order. Ted Tonks had to go on the run. He could no longer live openly, could no longer work, could no longer be safe in his own home. He became a fugitive, constantly moving, hiding, trying to survive. And Tonks, now pregnant and working with the Order of the Phoenix, lived with the constant fear that something would happen to her father. In April 1998, Tonks gave birth to a boy. She and Remus named him Ted, in honor of Tonks's father, and Remus in honor of the child's own father. But the baby quickly became known as Teddy, and the joy of his birth was tempered by the darkness of the world around them. Teddy didn't inherit his father's lycanthropy, to Remus's immense relief. But he inherited his mother's Metamorphmagus ability, able to change the color of his hair and facial features from birth, a rare and wonderful ability that connected him directly with his mother. Harry Potter was chosen as Teddy's godfather, an honor that meant a lot to Harry, Remus and Tonks. Harry had been instrumental in making Remus realize his responsibilities as a father, and the connection between them was deep and meaningful. For Harry, who had lost his own parents when he was a baby, being Teddy's godfather was a way to honor the memory of James and Lily Potter, to give a child the kind of love and protection he himself had received from his godfather, Sirius Black. But the happiness of having Teddy was brutally interrupted by a terrible tragedy. In April 1998, shortly after Teddy's birth, Ted Tonks was killed. He had been captured by snatchers during one of his escape attempts and was murdered simply for being a Muggle-born wizard who refused to submit to Voldemort's regime. Ted's death was devastating for Tonks and Andromeda. Ted had been a good, kind man, brave enough to marry Andromeda despite all the consequences, a loving father who had raised Tonks with values of equality and justice. And now he was dead, one more victim of the prejudice and hatred that had poisoned the wizarding world. Tonks didn't have time to properly process her grief. She had a newborn baby, a husband who was fighting on dangerous missions for the Order, and a war that was reaching its final climax. In May 1998, just 1 month after her father's murder, came the news that Harry Potter had been seen in Hogsmeade, near Hogwarts, and that Voldemort was mobilizing all his forces for a final battle at the school. The Battle of Hogwarts began on the night of May 2nd, 1998. It was the decisive confrontation between Voldemort's forces and all who still resisted him. Voldemort had given an ultimatum: hand over Harry Potter or the school would be attacked and everyone inside would be killed. But the teachers, students and members of the Order of the Phoenix at Hogwarts refused. They prepared to fight, knowing many wouldn't survive, but determined to defend what was right. Tonks left her weeks-old baby with her mother Andromeda and went to Hogwarts to fight. She didn't hesitate, didn't consider staying home safely with her son. She was an Auror, a member of the Order of the Phoenix, and her place was on the front lines of this battle that would determine everyone's future. Remus was also there, fighting in another part of the castle. Both knew the risks, both knew they might not come home to their son, but both made the choice to fight because it was what needed to be done. The Battle of Hogwarts was the most violent and destructive confrontation of the Second Wizarding War. Hundreds of wizards and witches, including many Hogwarts students still teenagers, fought against hordes of Death Eaters, giants, Dementors, Acromantulas, and other dark creatures that Voldemort had gathered for his army. The battle went through the entire night, going from room to room, corridor to corridor, destroying parts of the castle that had been a home and place of learning for 1,000 years. Tonks fought ferociously during the battle. She was in her element, using all her training as an Auror, all her magical ability, all her courage. She faced multiple Death Eaters, protected students, fought alongside Order colleagues. But at some point during the battle, in the chaos and violence of that terrible night, Nymphadora Tonks was killed. We don't know exactly how she died, who killed her, or where in the castle she fell. But we know she fought to the end, that she never gave up, that she died doing what she believed was right, and we know she didn't die alone. Remus Lupin, her husband, the love of her life, the father of her child, was killed in the same battle. Some accounts suggest Remus was killed by Antonin Dolohov, one of the cruelest and most skilled Death Eaters. As for Tonks, some believe she may have been killed by her own aunt, Bellatrix Lestrange, the same woman who had killed Sirius Black, although this was never definitively confirmed. When dawn finally came and the battle ended with Voldemort's final defeat, the survivors walked through the devastated castle, counting their dead. And there, in the Great Hall of Hogwarts that had been transformed into a temporary morgue, the bodies of Tonks and Remus were placed side by side. Harry Potter, exhausted and traumatized by the battle, saw their bodies there. He saw that they were holding hands, united even in death. And he thought of Teddy, the weeks-old baby who was now an orphan, who would never know his parents, who would grow up as Harry had grown up, without memories of the mother and father who had died fighting to give him a better world. The deaths of Tonks and Remus were among the most tragic losses of the Battle of Hogwarts. They had just begun their life together, had a newborn son, had so much to live for. But they made the choice to fight, to sacrifice themselves if necessary, because they understood that some things were more important than their own lives. They fought for a world where their son could grow up free from prejudice, where muggle-borns wouldn't be persecuted, where werewolves wouldn't be discriminated against, where love would be stronger than hate. Teddy Remus Lupin was orphaned at just a few weeks old. He was raised by his grandmother, Nymphadora Tonks, who had lost her husband and her only daughter within weeks. But Teddy didn't grow up without love or without knowing the story of his parents. Harry Potter, as Teddy's godfather, remained extremely present in his life. Harry visited Teddy regularly, told stories about Remus and Tonks, ensured that the boy grew up knowing the courage, love and sacrifice of his parents. Teddy grew up becoming a remarkable young man in his own right. He inherited his mother's Metamorphmagus ability and used this ability with the same joy and creativity that Tonks had used. He frequently changed the color and style of his hair, just as his mother had done, and those who had known her saw in him constant reflections of her vibrant personality and indomitable spirit. Teddy eventually attended Hogwarts, where he was selected for Hufflepuff House, the same house as his mother, and became head boy during his 7th year, an honor that would have made Tonks and Remus immensely proud. The story of Nymphadora Tonks is a story about identity, choice and courage. She was born into a family divided by prejudice, descended from both pure-blood wizards, obsessed with racial purity, and from muggle-borns who represented everything those purists despised. She could have been crushed by these contradictions, could have been defined by the rejection of half her family or by the traumas her mother had faced. But Tonks chose to define herself. She rejected even the name she was given, insisting on being called only Tonks, a declaration that she wouldn't be defined by others' expectations or traditions that didn't make sense to her. Her ability as a Metamorphmagus was the perfect physical manifestation of who she was, someone who refused to be confined to a single identity, to a single appearance, to a single way of being. She was fluid, mutable, always authentic to herself in each moment, and that was her strength. Tonks also taught us about unconditional love and the courage to fight for what's right, even when the world seems to be falling apart. She loved Remus Lupin not despite his lycanthropy, but simply because she loved him, period. She refused to accept society's prejudices about werewolves, just as her mother had refused to accept prejudices about muggle-borns. And when Remus tried to distance himself from her because of his own insecurities, she fought for that love, persisted, and eventually helped him see that he deserved happiness. And in the end, Tonks showed us what true sacrifice means. She had everything to live for, a husband she loved, a newborn son who needed her, a mother who had already lost so much and couldn't bear to lose more. She could have stayed home, protected herself, focused only on her family. No one would have blamed her for making that choice. But Tonks knew that some fights are too big to sit out, that some causes are worth any sacrifice, that the world her son would grow up in depended on the choices she made in that moment. So she went to Hogwarts that night in May, and she fought and she died, along with dozens of other brave people who made the same impossible choice. And because of that sacrifice, Voldemort was defeated. The genocidal regime he had established was overthrown, and a new era began for the wizarding world, an era where children like Teddy Lupin could grow up free from the shadows that had haunted previous generations. Tonks's life lasted only 25 years, but in that relatively short time, she lived completely, loved deeply, fought fiercely, and left a legacy that would continue through her son and through all those whose lives she touched. She proved that you don't need to live for a long time to live with meaning, that courage doesn't mean absence of fear, but action, despite fear, that true love transcends all social barriers and prejudices, and that some things are worth more than life itself. Nymphadora Tonks was a Metamorphmagus, an aura, a member of the Order of the Phoenix, a wife, a mother, and above all, a person who refused to be defined by anything other than her own choices and values. She lived authentically, loved fiercely, fought courageously, and died heroically. And although her life was tragically short, her story continues to inspire all of us to live with the same courage, authenticity, and unconditional love that she demonstrated in every moment of her existence. This was the true and complete story of Nymphadora Tonks, one of the most extraordinary witches the magical world has ever known. And so, we come to the end of this incredible journey through the life of Nymphadora Tonks, a witch who taught us that being true to yourself is the greatest magic of all. If you enjoyed this complete and detailed content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and leave that like to help the video reach more people who also love these deep stories from the wizarding world. Your subscription is fundamental for us to continue producing content like this, exploring each character with the respect and depth they deserve. Also leave in the comments which character you want to see in the next video. I love knowing your opinion, and your suggestions always inspire me. Thank you so much for staying until the end, for embarking with me on this emotional story of courage, love, and sacrifice. Until the next video, and always remember, the greatest magic is in being who you truly are.